立法會主席。
The President. Will continue the motion under Articles 73, 5 and 10 of the Basic Law of HKSAR of the People's Republic. Mr. Andrew Hsu. Thank you, President. As on the Claudia's motion to request to summon the Secretary of Security and the Director of Immigration to attend before the Council to explain on the decision to refuse visa extension for Mr. Victor Mella, the media and the pro-establishment camp members on different occasions had already stated, as in line with international practice for applicants who are refused entry to Hong Kong, a lot of jurisdiction would not need to offer any explanation. Even the England and the American countries, as so praised by the pro-establishment camp, they would offer explanation. Kuwaiti doctors would like to give a speech in the Western countries, even though it will hold a visa, it would refuse entry to board them by the American agents, and while the visa is later revoked without explanation. And the Russian Abramovich, and who is expired on April this year, and he submitted a visa extension application, and yet the relevant government had refused the application, and also no explanation offered. According to certain state laws in the U.S., marijuana is legal in certain states, and since the Trump administration against the legalization, a lot of the Canadians engaged in the marijuana trade have been refused entry in the U.S. without any explanation given. From the above examples, when a government refused to explain to persons denied the visa application is rather commonplace. Well, if you ask me if I want to know the reason, I don't think it's necessary. Not that I don't care about world affairs. Just the UK and America and Hong Kong, we are a free economy and an international city. And for those who come here to work and do business and to travel, to study, and for cultural exchange, we very much welcome them. We're willing to approve their visa applications, and when approval and for extending the visa, they must comply with the visa requirements. Okay, take this for example. You want to travel to the U.S., they would ask you right away, how much money do you bring? And where do you plan to live, and do you have any friends there? If you tell the immigration officer you only bought $50 and fail to provide an address and have no friends in the country, I believe that you will be refused entry, and however it would not be written on a piece of paper. If you intend to study in a place and however you want to work there while it's forbidden, and if you've been caught, you will not able to get a visa extension, and it will be done so without explanation. If you approved of employment visa as a chef and yet you've been caught at ticket scalping, I refuse that. You'll be also refused entry. I have not received cases like these. A lot of the Hong Kongers have complained about their friends not able to come to Hong Kong. Then I would inquire about the details. Why you refuse entry? And predominantly of those, maybe over the past year, they come here 5 times a week come here in Hong Kong from 8 and leave at 7 in the morning. But why are you traveling to Hong Kong every day? Is that really this exciting as a destination? We know that he come here to work. How may I help you to tell the immigration department to let you in. If someone is constitute a national security threat, or the regional government deem that person to be a concern to the law and order, I believe it's fully justified to refuse entry. I heard from a lot of non-establishment camp members. Well, they raised 2 points mainly. On the Victor Mel incident, they worry that the suppression of the press freedom and the freedom of speech. And second point, they're worried that the foreign investors' confidence. Why did they adopt this line of thinking? Well, maybe is there speculation that Mr. Mallet refused entry might have to do with his organizing of the FCC talk, which provide a platform for the National Party Andy Chan to propagate his pro-Hong Kong independence ideas. Mr. Mallet is a journalist, and is it refused entry due to his legitimate reporting or his criticism of the government, thus having his visa renewed denied, or due to other reasons as speculated by non-establishment camp members? I can't rule that out. I don't believe and the reasons for the refusal, maybe he had created a platform for the National Party, the Andy Chan, to propagate pro-independence ideas. However, this is my own projections. Mr. Mallet is a journalist. That doesn't mean it's a suppression of press freedom. For example, I'm an electrical counselor. If I sped through a red light and I was caught by a policeman and claimed I breached the traffic laws, can I accuse the government and the police of cracking down on electrical counselors? I'm an electrical counselor, but also a Hong Kong citizen. I need to obey local laws. And for the FCC incident, the SARG and the Foreign Ministry in the process had repeatedly reminded Mr. Mallet not to help the NHN and the National Party in providing them a platform, which he's definitely aware of. This whole thing is we're very public and reported around the world. Whether he did the right thing or not, I believe a lot of countries would have their own national security laws. Let's say Mr. Mallet in his own country supporting as a successionist in his own country in providing a platform. Will he breach the laws of that country? So the National Party was in the process of being banned by the government, which the public is well aware of. Well, in the process, is that really, was the National Party already being banned? If it happened today, a lot of the non-establishment camps in upholding freedom of speech. If for the sake of freedom of speech, will they provide a platform for the National Party to propagate pro-independence ideas? I believe that this won't happen because it would be breaking the law. So back then, maybe were we in some sort of a gray area, then the Hong Kong people, would need to do some soul searching. How do we enter a vacuum that allow some people to propagate pro-independence ideas? So Article 23 legislation, I hope the Social Secretary could tell the CE, well, the Liberal Party have advised the government to delay due to the prevailing environment. However, When it comes to Article 23 legislation, we have been supportive. Well, it was a different climate back then. A lot of the people have been exploiting this gray area to promote pro-independence ideas. As a part of China, we must protect national security and territorial integrity to plug this loophole. So Article 23 legislation, I believe the CE should give it serious thought and commence as soon as possible. And some of my colleagues have cited the issue of foreign investor confidence. So on the surface, as we're talking about freedom of the press and freedom of speech and foreign investors. However, the whole debate circled around Hong Kong independence. If not Andy Chan of Hong National Party and Mr. Victor Mallet and assist in providing a platform, this debate would not be necessary. So the crux is about Hong Kong independence, which means overthrowing the government. Even though the Hong Kong people are dissatisfied with the government in many fronts, however, to foster Hong Kong independence to overthrowing the government, we have to think carefully. So using, let's say, the Arabian Spring and the Jasmine Revolution, where the citizens are not satisfied with the governments and hope that they could be overthrown in place with something better. But how it turned out, if you read the news or from the YouTube, these countries and how much the local population has suffered, their economy was in a meltdown. People were starving, with the women being raped, and they need to flee their country to become refugees. And we led to the migrant crisis in Europe. To overthrow a government is not merely child's play. There are a lot of consequences to follow. The non-establishment camp claims if the foreign investor will need to maintain confidence, we ought to handle this better. If for the sake of business or attracting foreign investors to Hong Kong, that made us to accommodate or to turn Hong Kong into a base for to succeed for the country, I would not want this kind of business. And I want to remind the non-establishment camp for the Hong Kong independence activists, whether you support it in open or in disguise, they will be at your detriment. You should not take any political mileage from them, because otherwise you will start burning yourself. Please don't offer any support, because there will definitely a time bomb which will burn yourself. The Hong Kong public would definitely not support this. SRS and the Director of Immigration. On the government's refusal to renew his work visa, I fully agreed with the decision. And since SRS, Mr. Zhang Li and Mr. Eric Zheng are very important gatekeepers, one for the immigration and one for security. The duty of the legislative members also include protecting Hong Kong. For some persons refuse to obey the law and comply with visa requirements and commit to acts that might undermine the long-term interests of Hong Kong. The Security Bureau is obligated to highlight that. So for Ms. Claudia MO's motion in proposing to summon the SRS and the Director of Immigration to appear before the Council to explain, I don't think it's necessary. I just support the government's handling.
Mr. Shukachan. Morning, President. I speak in support of Ms. Claudia Mo's motion that pursuant to Article 73, 5 and 10 of the Basic Law, to summon the Secretary for Security and the Director of Immigration to attend before the Council on the government's refusal to renew for no reason the work visa of Mr. Victor Mallet, that they should produce all relevant papers and give evidence. It is generally felt that the work visa denial is a kind of revenge because the FCC invited Andy Chan, the former convener of the National Party, to speak. Mr. Peter Shiu was guessing the reason, but then it was quite evident. It's just that the administration refused to admit it. Mrs. Carrie Lam, and then CS4A and S4S, and then Director of Immigration said on different occasions that there was nothing to do with the freedom of the press. If you have strong reasons, why don't you just come forward and give an account to the public to alleviate their worries? But then they always resort to the statement they would not comment on cases in public. Do you still expect Hong Kong people to believe in one country, two systems? How can our doubts be resolved? Cliff Richberg, who was once chairman of FCC, wrote an article. This took a while, but the death of Hong Kong has arrived. What he said was that after a while, Hong Kong has finally died. I originally did not accept that kind of statement, but now it is undeniable that Hong Kong's death has come. We are speaking of the death of Hong Kong in the morning. It is not auspicious. But what I mean is Hong Kong is now under total control of Beijing. When foreign journalists seem to have done something that is offensive, or seem to have said something that is offensive, or seem to have written offensive articles, the price is clear that they will be expelled. Mr. Mallet has worked in Indonesia, and he wrote an article saying that there was the snatching of political power, and he was debarred from entering Indonesia for 2 years. And also he was, actually this is Cliff Richberg, and he was refused entry into Myanmar for 20 years. I never thought that this would happen in Hong Kong. I thought it was something quite distant from Hong Kong. Hong Kong is now on a par with Myanmar and Indonesia, which are authoritarian states. We are expelling a foreign journalist. Cliff also said that he came to Hong Kong in 1995 to set up a division of the Washington Post, and he had a dinner with Mrs. Yao, the then Director of Information Services, and he asked how he could apply for a reporter's card. Mrs. Yao then smiled and said there was no need to apply for a reporter card because we have the freedom of the press here. But today, what is left is your tactic to warn other possible offenders in your eyes. It is evident that Hong Kong has copied the Chinese model to govern and rule. But then this is actually a worse case because Mr. Mallet did not write any articles. His sin was that he was the executive chairman of the FCC and he just chaired a legitimate lunch gathering. His crime is that he chaired a totally legitimate and lawful luncheon gathering. The Hong Kong administration is actually showcasing to other journalists that this is a different government, and if you criticize the government, you will not be tolerated, and foreign journalists should toe the line, otherwise you should pack and leave. Well, I don't think that will happen, but I'm worried that in future, when they do their reporting, they would become more careful, more prudent, and they may exercise self-censorship. If that's the case, you have achieved your objective, and also the Hong Kong's death has really come. Another journalist who has been in Hong Kong for 40 years and who has worked in the Hong Kong Standard and also Hong Kong SCMP and also Hong Kong Free Press, Tim Hamlet, he said that this is an example of the fast shrinking of our free space. He criticized officials for only listening to Beijing and not minding the damage that would be done to Hong Kong. This is a very shameful act that you denied the work visa of Mr. Mallet. He was no threat to the government. According to Article 27 of the Basic Law, we are guaranteed freedom of the press and freedom of speech. Hong Kong has always been an open society, and we never did any political censorship on political dissidents. But now, in the name of a work visa denial, you are not enforcing the law in a rightful manner. The Security Bureau invoked Section 8 of the Society's Ordinance to ban the Hong Kong National Party. But as you know, the Society's Ordinance was passed to tackle triad societies, but now this is used on the Hong Kong National Party, so I don't think you have reasonably exercised the power you have been conferred with, and I think the only objective is to ban the promotion of independence. Lord Bingham, who has been regarded as the best judge after World War II, he said in his book, The Rule of Law, that government officials must exercise the powers they have been given in a fair manner. But the problem with Hong Kong is there is no longer the rule of law. The Animal Farm book, where there was a revolution by the pigs and human beings were driven out, and they wrote 7 rules on the wall. But then in the end, the 7 rules were reduced to just 1 rule, that 4 legs are good, 2 legs are bad. And of course, that is an analogy of high-handed authoritarian rule. It was said that we are only expelling Mallet and we are not threatening to kill him by death squad. And this is already very civilized. So someone in the pro-establishment camp wrote, well, I'm afraid that Hong Kong will deteriorate and go into an era of, or like the Cultural Revolution. Even if someone says 2 legs are bad, it might one day be carried in the Legislative Council and it might even be promoted in society. That's what happened in the book Animal Farm, and that's what happened during the Cultural Revolution. And the same thing will happen to Hong Kong. The red line on the wall says Hong Kong independence. I don't support Hong Kong independence, but I have to comment on this red line of Hong Kong independence. The president of the country, Mr. Xi Jinping, said that Hong Kong independence has touched the red line, and any persecution in Hong Kong has been made a legitimate act. When the emperor issues an order, everybody has to follow. The Mallet incident looks like an isolated incident, but we must understand oppression starts with individuals. If no one speaks up, this will continue. And the Hong Kong SARG reminds me of the statement, the evil of mediocrity. It means if you keep silent, you obey, and you are helping the authoritarian rule. In the end, the entire society will be pushed to the extremity of crime. It was said that the Nazi devil did not kill anyone. He just executed orders, and of course, he was the killer in reality. In Hong Kong, now we also have the evil of mediocrity. The CE and her officials are tightening up control in Hong Kong. Sometimes I just don't know whether they know this is bad for Hong Kong, they just want to do it because Beijing wanted it, or is it that they truly believe that this is good for Hong Kong? I can only say that Hong Kong has become worse because of the mallet incident. The CE, of course, is quite complacent, but Hong Kong's advantages are disappearing because we are going or getting closer to Beijing. Mr. C.Y. Leung was the first promoter, and he was writing so many articles on Facebook, and he was almost teaching the officials what to do. And of course, that would represent some pressure for incumbent officials. President, it was said that 3 persons can say that there is a tiger in society, and if there are 3 persons saying that, people will tend to believe, meaning that after repetition, a lie can become truth. And Hong Kong independence is not a real issue. And today we have 3 persons talking about independence, and independence may seem like a fact. The most important thing about one country, 2 systems is Hong Kong's uniqueness. Hong Kong is a member of the WTO. We have our own Olympics team. But in the long run, the international community can no longer really differentiate Hong Kong from China. Freedom House of the USA released a report on freedom, and Hong Kong's total ranking was only 59 scores, and we were just partially free. We had our scores falling for a row of 3 years. Hong Kong has expelled mallet, and we can imagine, come one day, Hong Kong will also ban all politically sensitive terms. It's just like the mainland tearing down crosses and also banning Winnie the Pooh. There is this mallet incident and also the disqualification cases and Lantau reclamation, and also building the Civil Service Academy, pushing away the training school for the mildly disabled. Just 2 days ago, my very good friend, my primary school mate, emigrated to Taiwan. I did not want to see him go, but we cannot blame anybody because everyone wants to find a safe place to live and work. We can only blame Hong Kong for not being such a place. The Immigration Department resorted to bureaucratic responses, saying that they would not comment on cases. And then, of course, the Foreign Ministry office said that this is totally within the power of Hong Kong's Immigration Department. And what we have worried about has become a fact. One country, 2 systems is on a road of no return. Mr. President, I'd like to tell a story that happened 10 years ago on the eve of the Olympics in Beijing. Mia Farrow came to Hong Kong to talk about humanitarian crisis in South Sudan. And of course, she also spoke at FCC, and the Foreign Ministry office objected, but it went on nevertheless. The only difference was the FCC was not politically revenged. There was no expulsion of any foreign journalist. But Hong Kong has now started on a road of collapse. It took a while. The death of Hong Kong has arrived. Thank you, President.
Mr. Jeremy Tam. President, myself and the Civic Party do not support Hong Kong independence. However, we are now looking at the denial of work visa renewal without reason of Mr. Victor Mallet, Vice President of the FCC and Hong Kong and Asia News Editor of the Financial Times. We were appalled and we request an explanation of such decision, and we want this decision to be rescinded. Hong Kong is always known for the rule of law as well as freedom of the press and of speech. The government has denied issuing a work visa for a renowned foreign correspondent without reason. It is a form of suppression of freedom of the press, and this would set a very dangerous precedent. Mr. Mallet has engaged in journalism for more than 30 years with the Financial Times and Reuters, and he joined the Foreign Correspondents Club in 2003. And to him, Hong Kong is like a home. And Mr. Mallet is no longer able to take part in events he organized. And in the aftermath of the decision, the Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, explained that they are complying with international practice and they serve to hide the real political motive. So I have 3 questions for the government. First of all, the government said they played by the laws. So which law of Hong Kong did Mr. Mallet break? If he did, the government should make it public. If Mr. Mallet did break any laws, he should have been arrested rather than being expelled. So which exact law did he break? He hosted multiple events at the FCC, and the FCC has conducted themselves in a professional manner and no laws were broken. I'd like to remind government officials and the pro-Beijing camp that Article 28 of the Basic Law safeguards the freedom of the person of Hong Kong to make publications, etc., and such rights cannot be jeopardized. The government has been talking about safeguarding national integrity. So when did Mr. Mallet engage in acts that divide the country? And different individuals would attend the FCC's events, and the FCC simply provides a platform for discussion, and the participants do not necessarily share the stance of the speaker. So you do not necessarily have to support the views of a speaker if you are to arrange a discussion or forum. When you think about the election or campaign forums, candidates of different backgrounds were invited to speak. If that is the case, why didn't you kick them all out of Hong Kong? Carrie Lam said she would not explain the reason for denial of visa, and that this is international practice. I don't quite get that. For the UK, when a visa application is rejected, an official form would be provided by the government citing the reasons. For instance, the applicant's income might be lower than the required level. So So the failure to provide any reason is not international practice. I think what she meant was that the reason would not be given to the public, but that the applicant would be told the reason. So it's very important to give a reason in terms of procedural justice, and the applicant must know the reason for denial. That way, the applicant can seek an appeal. If the applicant does not know about the reason, how can they lodge an appeal? The government denied entry for Mr. Mallet out of political motives, but they did not dare to give the real reason. They only cited the so-called international practice. A number of pro-Beijing members attacked the FCC, and they stigmatized the FCC of jeopardizing national integrity. So they made it sound like the FCC is a triad society, and what they do have grave consequences on Hong Kong. Before the Victor Mallet incident, how many people of the public were aware of the forums organized by the FCC? The pro-Beijing camp said the talk was globally broadcasted and it was influential, but before the Victor Mallet incident, only a few dozen people clicked like. It was a very small audience. It was 100 or 200 people maximum. If not for the endorsement from the SAR government and the Foreign Affairs Ministry, it would not have attracted such a huge audience. So is the pro-Beijing camp actually driving such efforts against national integrity? When some people have done things the government doesn't like, and the government has become the butt of the joke on the international scene. According to an international news freedom index, Hong Kong used to rank 58 in 2013, and now it ranks 73. And it's now comparable to countries like Albania and Tanzania. Hong Kong's press freedom will further deteriorate, and the government should not think that their suppression would go unnoticed. If you say that anything that goes against the basic law could not be discussed in a talk, or that the relevant persons would be expelled, I'm sure a lot of members from the pro-Beijing camp might be guilty as well. I'd like to read from the foreword of a book. And Hong Kong has been part of the territory of China since ancient times. It was occupied by Britain after the Opium War in 1840. On the 19th of December 1984, the Chinese and British government signed the joint declaration on the question of Hong Kong, affirming that the government of the PRC will resume the exercise of sovereignty over Hong Kong with effect from the 1st of July 1997, thus fulfilling the long-cherished common aspiration of the Chinese people for the recovery of Hong Kong. So the exact wording is the recovery of Hong Kong. This is the preamble of the Basic Law. According to the Basic Law, Hong Kong would be recovered. Our Secretary for Education, Kevin Young, said that we should not use the phrase recovery of Hong Kong. So what he said was what he said actually against the Basic Law, but he's now a politically appointed official. If you say that any forums that mention anything against the Basic Law should be disallowed, or that the hosts should be expelled, when we look at Article 111 of the Basic Law, which says the Hong Kong dollar as the legal tender in the Hong Kong SAR shall continue to circulate. And Mr. Ran Yam said that for international monetary transactions, the renminbi should be promoted as legal tender. You can say that under the basic law, the Hong Kong dollar is the legal tender, but could other currencies be used as the legal tender? Obviously, there is a question mark. So in that case, would what Mr. Joseph Yam said be against the basic law? So would all the forums he attended be barred? What about our chief executive in the CE election forum? She said the only article she doesn't agree with in the basic law is Article 104, which says the Hong Kong SAR shall follow the principle of keeping expenditure within the limits of revenues in drawing up its budget. She doesn't agree with the phrase keeping expenditure within the limits of revenues. Now she is chief executive and she attended this forum. Why didn't the SAR government accuse her of not agreeing with this article? The government did not bar this forum from taking place, and no condemnation was given, and now Mrs. Carrie Lam is the chief executive. So Hong Kong people do not know where the red line lies. Apparently, we cannot say certain things that go against the basic law, including Hong Kong independence. So apparently the PRC constitution cannot be not complied with. And the basic law is now incorporating the constitution of the PRC, and we have 40-odd pages on the PRC constitution. So does it mean that anything in Hong Kong in the future, anything that happens in Hong Kong in the future cannot go against the mainland or the PRC constitution? Let's look at instrument 25 of the constitution. For the planned birth giving, this should dovetail with the population policy. So the former one-child policy or the current two-child policy. So if this is not practiced in Hong Kong, would this be against the PRC constitution? So the answer is, of course, yes. But according to the basic law, these would not be considered or controlled. You always say that apart from the basic law, we also have to comply with the PRC constitution. So where is the red line? You can use this excuse to take action against the FCC. Back then, the Hong Kong Nationalist Party was not yet barred. If we still embrace the principle that till you are proved guilty, you are still innocent. So what if that's the case? What was wrong with a correspondence club organizing a talk? The activity itself was not illegal. If so, they would have been arrested already. So So it's obvious that you want to show people that those in power do not like what you are trying to express. So the Civic Party supports this motion, and the government should provide all relevant documents relating to the Victor Mallet incident and to give evidence and testify so that the public would understand why the visa application was denied. Thank you.
Mr. Lam Chek-Ting. President, these 2 days we heard colleagues from the pro-establishment camp talking about the patriotic sentiments. I found this all very fantastical. A lot of the colleagues were holding foreign passport, or even more than one passport. So when they would talk the patriotic sentiments, are they referring to UK, Canada, China, or all of them? I found this whole thing fantastical, as if I'm reading some sci-fi novels. They claimed that the FCC had provided a venue to the Hong Kong National Party, Andy Chan, to promote Hong Kong independence, which is a violation of the one country, two system, and was a violation of the PRC Constitution. So in providing a venue for a forum, does that equate to supporting Hong Kong independence? Like Mr. Jeremy Tam said, this is common sense.
好多人就覺得，喂，你提供個場合俾佢講，就係宣揚。
That if you provide a venue for Hong Kong independence, this means you're supporting Hong Kong independence. Those alleged codes also provide a venue for those with different views. So does that mean that it do more than providing a venue to air political views? So the LCSG to provide a venue for the July 4th commemoration, that they are supporting to ending the one party rule and supporting the work of the Alliance for the Patriotic Association. So Andrew, when is sitting next to me, I never feel that the LCSG is supporting the organizer to in approving venue hire to eligible hirers to express their political stance is a sign of an open, progressive society. As if you by providing a venue, that means you're supporting them. And also, the speakers on that day never quite mentioned that they're supportive of Mr. Andy Chan of providing money and technology and helping to further the aims of Hong Kong for independence. I didn't hear any of that. That a lot of reports of the forums have raised serious questions, and which Mr. Andy Chan have failed to answer and address most of them, especially how the Hong Kong independence could be achieved. That this party has been ridiculed as a one-man's party. Have you ever met other members? Have any organized any large-scale activities? None. And yet the government make a big deal out of it and decided to suppress and ban it. And now that in FC provide a forum to let them advance ideas while having a question session that wouldn't be tolerated, that the organizers' visa have been application denied and expelled him from Hong Kong. If a host of the forum have been expelled, so that the Hong Kong government plan to expelled the chairman, all the board members of the FCC. Please don't think that in organizing the forum that will be the views of the organizers. Sometimes it might involve a series of speakers. A lot of current and former officials like Sarah Leung and Carrie Lam have been to FCC to outline their ideas. Does that mean that at FCC will support their ideas? Not necessarily. That's common sense. Common sense seems to have problem establishing in Hong Kong will be distorted as fallacies. If we adopt this logic, a lot of foreign journalists have also covered the June 4th commemoration at Victoria Park and conduct live reporting. Does that mean these journalists are providing a platform? And if you look at a lot of the press report, like 60 Minutes, they interviewed a lot of controversial figures. Like, for example, it had interviewed Osama bin Laden, a well-known terrorist. Does that mean they're providing a platform for bin Laden to advocate the extremist views? No. The National Geographic Channel has also interviewed the former Nazis and interviewed them. How do they see their own atrocities? Does that mean they're providing a platform for Nazis to propagate their ideas? Why? Because the media are critical. They just don't simply take in whatever that was told and simply parroting the message without judgment. Please don't apply the People's Daily operation model on other media. And well, on the People's Daily, only the positive make it to the news. If you're critical of the government, there's no way you can make it to the paper. Please don't apply the People's Daily model that if for any press that report the other stories, I mean you're supporting or endorsing it. Very often you see the local and the foreign press will interview controversial figures and to criticize their philosophy and their acts. That's the freedom of the speech and the press freedom as typical of a free progressive society. So when the government want to do something bad, the first thing they do is to turn off the lights and shut the door, expel the journalist, so that others in the society will not get to know the reality, and so that the international community will have no way to grasp the actual situation. You see a lot of authoritarian government when cracking down on society, they will expel the foreign press and stop them from reporting. For Tiananmen Square massacre, the first thing to do is to turn off the lights on the Chang'an Street. They will expel the foreign journalists, and yet a lot of the journalists are risking the bullets on hidden and dangerous locations, continue their reporting and conducting live reporting while the bullets were being fired. While recording this footage and bringing them to Hong Kong and elsewhere to let the world know the situation of the Beijing massacre and the grisly footage. That is the duty of the reporter, and also the last defense of human civilization. If the high officials have seen this Korean movie Taxi Cab Driver, and for back in the Gwangju incident, how do the South Korean government attempt a news blockade, even in other parts of South Korea not aware of such a brutal crackdown, and rely on those journalists who are willing to risk their lives, who went to the scene to report. What is there to hide for the Hong Kong government? Just lay it in the open, just issue press release to refute them and claim that Hong independence is unlawful and will not have the confidence of the public. Just made it public. Hong Kong is a free society. If your grounds are justified, there we have the support of the local and abroad. And of you, anyone, foreign governments offering support for Hong Kong independence or any open ed acknowledging Hong Kong independence? None. And for those who advocated Hong Kong independence, they couldn't even explain how they would achieve it. And yet, you turn it into an international media spotlight. the government claimed that whether we approve the work visa application or not, we not comment on specific cases, and as an unusual practice, we don't need to offer explanation. The UK government has already issued a statement that the UK, as per usual practice, they will explain to the applicant. Otherwise, how would the applicant lodge an appeal or to rectify themselves? Does that the denial will be a lifetime ban? No. The pro-establishment camp claims that some of us are speeding past a red light, well aware that it's illegal, and yet you insist on holding a forum that you have been warned, and now that you're being expelled to Hong Kong is your own just desserts. Well, the red light of Hong Kong is our law. That our law said it's illegal to hold forums. Well, what's so illegal about organizing a forum in the private clubhouse? Otherwise, the S3S will send the police to enforce the law. So what is the red lights? So it's like the red, the amber, and green going all over the place. You have no idea how the lights will turn. So, well, for example, as you said to Andrew Ken, well, we have to be careful from now on in advocating ending the one-party rule at the June 4th commemoration. For the debate on June 4th, Andrew Leung, our president of the receiver call from the Chinese Liaison Office, while there's violation one country, two system or the PRC constitution, that this topic is not inadmissible as debate. Well, you have proved that many years before. Also, we've been in trouble now since you approved this tend to be raised before. Things shouldn't be like this. I was supporting this time on one of the very rare occasions. You can't just shift the red line all the time. Well, I have no idea when the red light will come on. I don't know what you're thinking. So if you want to make it clear, just legislate. So after passage by LegCo, that all those who organize forums on Hong Kong independence, their hosts and the board of governors will be completely banned, and those who are not Hong Kong permanent residents will be expelled, and the venue will be resumed by the government and ban the operation and revoke their registration, and the venue will be closed for 6 months or a year, just like those premises with drugs being found, or just legislate to see how the Hong Kong people react. Well, when I'm studying public administration at COHK, our forums were on all kind of topics. Well, doing assignments were exciting. Well, my Jewish professor had given an assignment on that after you study anarchy. See, I just proposed a plan. Then how do you implement an anarchism in Hong Kong? And the students have been very creative on how to turn Hong Kong into anarchy. That's the academic freedom and freedom of speech. Doesn't mean after we complete the assignment, that means that we are advocating anarchism. That's just common sense. President, the Hong Kong government claimed that Hong Kong is an international city. It should allow different voices and open debate and international media to listen to different political views and using our judgment to understand the real situation in Hong Kong. This Mallet incident is not the first person journalist being expelled from Hong Kong, and wouldn't be the only one. I believe he won't be the last one either. And for the press freedom and the freedom of speech, I took a dim view. I hope the Hong Kong public will getting aware of this deterioration that must speak up to defend our freedom of speech and freedom and safeguard our civil rights. We should not let Hong Kong continue to fall. We should not let the Pt3 camp with holding foreign passport, with talking about their patriotic sentiments and claiming to crack down on Hong independence. I'm not talking about you, Miss Regina. I'm not saying all of you. Please stop speaking.
Dr. Zheng Chongtai. After this incident of Victor Mallet, Ms. Claudia Mo, as the convener of the pro-democracy camp, asked me whether I would take part in co-signing a document. I declined at that moment because I have my own views. But today, with regard to this motion to summon the S4S and the Director of Immigration, I will speak on it to say why I will support it, but I would like to give you that bit of background. First of all, this motion is a typical motion under the British parliamentary kind of system that we are registering a stance. But Hong Kong is now in the biggest crisis since World War II. We are registering our stance on certain topics, but is that meaningful to Hong Kong society? If we continue in this mode of operation, what kind of effect can we achieve? Let me spend some time on history. We had June 4th, and then all the way to 2003, we had SARS. All that brought about political and economic turmoil, but we survived. That is why people say Hong Kong is a blessed land. During the Cold War, the CCP took power and it adopted a policy of keeping Hong Kong in a certain state so that Hong Kong could be utilized. And also, after that, the British government exchanged with the CCP conditions for keeping Hong Kong prosperous. And then Hong Kong became a window and a valve for continuing to have technology from overseas countries so that we could help the development of China. Therefore, Hong Kong is a relatively free land. And of course, our grandparents fled to Hong Kong from China. However, the price is that we are moving very slowly on our road to democracy. And Hong Kong people have now somehow got used to it, saying that it's all right not to have democracy as long as we are free. In the 60s, the Vietnamese War dragged U.S. into treacherous soil. At that time, the candidate of the Republican Party, Nixon, said in 1968 that there would be a decent conclusion of the Vietnamese War. In 1971, Nixon sent Kissinger to China. And then in 1972, Nixon went to China to have an ice-breaking journey. In other words, there was the first time for the CCP to face the international world. And then there was the signing of the Shanghai Communique to normalize relationships between U.S. and China, and that was achieved in 1979. There was no longer atrocity between the two countries, and it was made much easier for China to take back Hong Kong. And after the 1989 massacre, and when Clinton came to power, again there was cooling off of the relationship. Dr. Chang, this is the background, President. I understand. What is this to do with this debate? I will continue. I will be very brief. I will come back to why I would support the motion. Mr. President, I hope you understand. I'm talking about the U.S., China, and Hong Kong and the relationship among the three places. At that time, after economic reform, there was the change of attitude on the part of the U.S. There was the formal human rights dialogue, and that is why over the last 20, 30 years, the U.S. has been releasing human rights report, and in recent years, it also pay attention to Hong Kong. And then it was trying to build a middle class so that China could be brought onto the road of development. I think you are digressing. If you don't come back, I will stop you from speaking. Please come back to this debate. Okay, I will skip one paragraph. In that context, and that is the relationship between U.S. and China, Hong Kong has acted as an agent, and that has been the basis for Hong Kong's democratic progress, and that is why Hong Kong was able to preserve this condition of having freedom but not democracy. In 1994, on the 2nd of March, there was the carrying of an article by Mr. Wong Yoke Man, a former legislator. In that article, it pointed out clearly that in this debate today, President, what is about this debate today? And it went on to say the CCP and Britain fought over the future of Hong Kong, and there were different conflicts of interest. It was a conflict between organization and organization, so the organization must mobilize the crowds, and it has to have power, and the power would be built with concepts, and both sides accused each other. Still, you have not come to this debate. If you continue to speak not on this debate, please, I will have to stop you from speaking. This is the last warning. Okay, you have to look up that article by Mr. Wong Yoke Man that he wrote at the peak of his career. That was in 1994. In 2014, there was the August 31st MPC decision or resolution that there would not be universal suffrage, and it ushered in Hong Kong's political turmoil and also the Occupy movement. Again, I will quote a paragraph from Mr. Wong's article to do a summary. This has pushed Hong Kong people onto the battleground, and Hong Kong people suffered serious injury. I believe this is what we are facing today. Two crowds were mobilized by organizations, not knowing why and not knowing what is happening, and yet they are having this controversy. Let us talk about a realistic issue, Mr. President. This motion requires the Secretary for Security to testify and give evidence. But I believe, given the cavalier attitude of the SARG, they might just upload a YouTube clip to say this is evidence. But of course, the FCC did not put Andy Chan's speech on YouTube or internet, meaning that the FCC had given consideration to the situation that the SARG is making use of the society's ordinance to ban the National Party, and perhaps the FCC might be dragged into the picture. Today, we have spent a lot of time to debate this particular condition that Hong Kong is in. It was just an invitation to speak. At that time, the SARG had all the time they needed to use legal administrative means to ban that invitation. Of course, under the premise of press freedom and freedom of speech, if you had done that, I would have criticized you. But they had the time. Why did they want to use such a low-handed approach? And I am pointing out today that in this debate, what are we talking about? We are just registering our stance. We are just the agents. But from the point of view of the Hong Kong public, how should we carry on in such a situation? I was giving you the historical context. I like you to look at the past 30 to 50 years. We were fighting for democracy. But are we fighting on behalf of those people who are foreign nationals? Or are we really facing up to this society where there is freedom but not democracy? And of course, this is totally related to the debate today. The motion mentions Mr. Victor Mallet, the Asian news editor of the Financial Times, saying that he has been denied a visa, and it is said that this is about sovereignty, and people say this is also done by other countries. Well, yes, there is some reason in that, but recently the journalist Jamal Khashoggi was killed in the embassy. And it goes to show that there would be political consequence even if you could do anything you want to in the embassy grounds. And maybe new battle lines could be drawn between other countries and China by making use of Hong Kong, and Hong Kong would be turned into a battleground of political fights, officials and members. And we are just an agent. Dr. Cheng Chung-tai, please stop speaking. Dr. K.K. Kwok.
鄭松泰議員，
Dr. Cheng Chung-tai, I reminded you multiple times that you were going off track. I asked you to stop speaking right now. If you do not stop, I would order you to leave the chamber. Dr. Cheng Chung-tai, please be seated.
鄭松泰
Dr. Cheng Chung-tai, this is my last warning. If you do not sit down, I would have no choice but to rule that you have committed gross misconduct. Dr. Cheng Chung-tai, please sit down. I would have to deal with this issue of Dr. Cheng Chung-tai first. The clerk, please help Ms. Dr. Cheng leave the chamber. Dr. Cheng Chung-tai, you have committed gross misconduct. Please leave the chamber immediately. Dr. Cheng Chung-tai. Mr. Andrew Wen, President, a point of order, a point of order. The motion itself is on freedom of speech. I hope that we can have a lot of space for freedom of speech at the council here. I'd like to raise a point of order with your ruling. I don't know whether Dr. K.K. Kwok will be treated the same way as Dr. Cheng Chung-tai. Which part of his speech do you think has digressed? I was listening to him. I felt that it was totally related to the motion. He was going into the wider context, but I think it was totally related.
My judgment was that I have issued multiple reminders to Dr. Cheng Chung-tai, but he had spoken 7 or 8 minutes but was yet to enter the topic proper. That's why I stopped him. You can refer to the audio recording. Please be seated. Dr. K.K. Kwok. President, I speak in support of Ms. Claudia MO's motion to summon the Secretary for Security, John Lee, and Director of Immigration, pursuant to the Basic Law, to testify or give evidence in relation to the SAR government's refusal to renew for no reason the work visa of Mr. Victor Mallet. President, I want to quote an opinion piece from the Universal or Global Times. They said, with one less person like Victor Mallet, Hong Kong would not lose anything. But with a person like him, his acts would jeopardize Hong Kong. After the Victor Mallet incident, foreign enterprises, Marco Rubio from the China Commission, as well as the Foreign Minister of the UK, requested an explanation. It was not a typical incident of a journalist being refused a visa. According to the UK Foreign Minister, such decision was politically motivated, and this jeopardized Hong Kong. Yesterday, Ms. Edward Yao, the Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development, talked about how Hong Kong can be immune from the ongoing Sino-US trade tensions and how Hong Kong can enjoy certain privileges. Through the US-Hong Kong Policy Act, Hong Kong is given privileges from the US, but that is on the basis that Hong Kong is an independent entity. According to the basic law, Hong Kong has different rules and laws from the mainland, and these are enshrined in the basic law, including freedom of speech, freedom to form unions, etc. And according to Article 41, persons in the Hong Kong HKSAR other than Hong Kong residents shall, in accordance with the law, enjoy the rights and freedoms of Hong Kong residents prescribed in the basic law. From what we see every day in Hong Kong, one country, two systems, a high degree of sovereignty, Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong, these have become lies. We are moving towards one country, two system in line with the mainland. In the mainland, it's very easy to expel a journalist. It is no issue at all, like the Global Times said. In mainland China, journalists can be jailed, their families can be eradicated or even expelled. So according to Chinese standards, the denial of work visa of Mr. Mallet is very normal. Some pro-Beijing members said that Mr. Mallet should be jailed instead, and the treatment he faced was only very light. So what kind of logic was that? Hong Kong has a system that is embraced by the international community, especially businesses. We have an independent judiciary, and these are the values which mean that Hong Kong could build a hefty ethics reserve. The children and grandchildren of the mainland officials are all studying in Hong Kong. For example, the grandchildren of Zhang Jimin and the children of many other officials. Why don't they stay in Beijing? They want to come to Hong Kong because Hong Kong has a unique freedom, and the officials want their children and offsprings to live in somewhere with a system that is different from the mainland, and now we are jeopardizing the system. Victor Mallet is only an Asian news editor of the Financial Times. I wonder how many Hong Kong people would read the FT, but the FT enjoys a high standing globally. And Mr. Mallet has been representing the Financial Times and other media since 1983 all around the world, including countries such as South Africa, Zambia, and India. He was never rejected a work visa in such manner. So does it mean that Hong Kong is even worse than Zambia? This is what's happening right now. What did Victor Mallet actually do? As the then vice president of the Foreign Correspondents Club, he invited Andy Chan to deliver a talk. If you ask most people in Hong Kong, I'm sure they would not agree with Hong Kong independence. But in Hong Kong, everyone's right to speak should be safeguarded unless they conduct illegal acts. And under the society's ordinance, Andy Chan was barred from speaking. Well, I do not want to go into that right now. So by organizing a talk, it doesn't mean that you are endorsing the speaker. The mainland invited people like Donald Trump or the UK foreign minister to deliver speeches. Does it mean that they are supporting Donald Trump or the Japanese prime minister? Of course not. The FCC simply wants people to know about Hong Kong's situation. When you look at foreign reports, they were very fair. They asked Andy Chan how many people were there in the party. And Andy Chan replied that he did not keep a number. So the FCC said that they had no way to know how many supporters they had. So it could be a very small number or it can be a big one. But the readers can make a judgment for themselves. Hong Kong protects freedom of the press and freedom of the speech for individuals. If I invite John Lee to deliver a talk, does it mean that I support you? I might just want you, I just want you to explain how you suppress freedom under the society's ordinance. So you are able to explain your stance. So it's the same for the FCC. For a number of contentious issues, they would invite speakers to talk. Like seminars organized in universities or even the government, different views can be given. If you do not like it, you can ask people, the patriots, to deliver talks. Wen Wei Po and Ta Kung Pao can run these talks every day of the year. No actual action was taken to show support towards Hong Kong independence. I read all Victor Mallet's articles and there was nothing in support of independence. So the accusation was non-existent. We want to summon the Director of Immigration because no reason was given. This is against the practice of Hong Kong. Do you dare to say that Beijing asked me to make such decision and I had no choice? So perhaps it would be this would be the truth or something close to the truth. Like Carrie Lam said, Hong Kong has always respected freedom of speech. So apparently she would not suppress freedom of the press or speech. So in other words, she was under instruction of the mainland. So you visited the mainland recently and you admitted that you receive some kind of instruction. So we have to let the global community know that the protections under the basic law are all lies. Why don't you do that? If you refuse to do that, Hong Kong's trade partners will express concerns about Hong Kong. Like Rubio said, whether Hong Kong's can still enjoy a unique trade status depends on whether Hong Kong would still embrace its core values in its system, rule of law and judiciary, etc. If this is lost, then what would be the difference between Hong Kong and other mainland cities? When Hong Kong is like Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, why would we would not have a special status, and the foreign money would simply go to Shanghai and Beijing? And the IMF and the Heritage Foundation gave very high scores to Hong Kong. And Hong Kong has unique core values, including freedom of the press and freedom of speech. So these are values cherished by Hong Kong people. We have sacrificed too much already. $100 billion worth of money in white elephant projects. We face more and more interference from Beijing. Yesterday, the pro-Beijing members delivered some ridiculous statements. They quoted Lau Nai Keung, who used to be a columnist at the Hong Kong Economic Journal. Why didn't we speak up for them? Lau Nai Keung was a Basic Law Committee member. If he wanted to write, he could publish everywhere. But his column was banned. So a lot of mainland entrepreneurs purchased the media outlets. They could take over newspapers, TV channels, and the Hong Kong Economic Journal is not what it used to be. The dissidents in Hong Kong have less and less room to speak. Those in power enjoy all the control, and yet some people are saying that people like Lau Nai Keung could not speak out. Independence is not as big a crime when you think about what Mao Zedong said in 1919 and in 1920 and 21. He talked about the so-called dual independence, and he saw that the Hunan people had a chance to be independent, and there were two commonwealth jurisdictions at that time. So you never know what will happen, but we will defend the freedom of speech in Hong Kong till the very end, or else we would lose our special status as well as our competitive edge. Thank you.
Mr. Andrew Wan. I would like to quote certain passages, so please give me some time before cutting me off. I speak to support Ms. Claudia's motion pursuant to Article 73, 5 and 10 of Basic Law to summon the Esther S. John Lee and the Director of Immigration to attend for the Council on the incident of Victor Mallet or at his visa renewal refusal to produce all relevant papers and records as this would testify at LegCo. This is no minor incident. I see a lot of pro-establishment camp members. I'm not cite one by one. Well, a claim that is insignificant. What a lot of people digressed Well, I want to say that to President Leung, that while the other members digressed, the President did not interrupt. And on the visa denial refusal by of Victor Mal to urge for explanation. So why in mentioning about Hong Kong independence is totally irrelevant. You simply go on a tangent. I don't see the connection. I see that the president had very accommodating. So, I see how the president have ordered Dr. Chang to leave the room. Well, as if this is simply turn this debate into a confession. So it simply stick to the central government's line and using this Communist Party rhetoric to blast Hong Kong independence. I would not object to your holding your views on the Hong Kong independence, which we do not endorse. However, we can handle it in a legitimate and rational manner. Even in this debate that with absolute evidence to claim that you are liaising with the Western or external forces, well, it's simply very poor informed. I thought we had more room to maneuver, but it turned out not to be. So, on the refusal to renew the work visa of Victor Mount, what are the crux of the freedom of speech and the press freedom? Well, Mr. Mount once said he would not support Hong Kong independence. Well, just because FCC had hosted a luncheon seminar, which was a long-standing tradition, we stepped it on the red line set by the central government. Well, there's more than one red line. Like Mr. Lam Chak-Ting said, once in a while, you claim Hong Kong independence is taboo, and so self-determination is taboo. I don't know why it's not allowed. I used to be a social worker, so I remember the 7 principles. The first one will be the self-determination. Well, you can arbitrarily draw any red line you want, and you claim that asking for any one-party rule is forbidden. Some would not accept, and some would not agree. So the more red lines we have, the more clownish we look. I hope that the pro-establishment camp can take that to caution. Mr. Horace Chang has set out examples and claimed that the Western countries have similar occurrences. Well, I protest about it. So when me and my brother went to the U.S., my brother was refused entry, and I argued with the immigration official, and it caused a scene. But at the end, he was still refused entry. It was for my sister's wedding. Well, at the end, we need to provide a reason why some were provided a reason or some were allowed entry with the occupation related. Even though he worked as a chef at a 5-star hotel for many years, however, they felt that a chef is a sensitive occupation. Well, you can claim the U.S. government was acting stupid, but at least he provided you with a reason. This time, there's no clear reason given. And Horace Chang claimed that, well, it's just like the UK. It seems like international laughing stock. While the Hong Kong Consul General had already refuted that is a wrong comparison. They would definitely get a reason why the Hong Kong government didn't. Well, I heard from other colleagues, well, you provided them with a venue which threatened national security. Well, you provide a venue that means you're endorsing it and advocating it. Well, I found this logic terrible. When I was a social worker, I invited the establishment camp colleagues to give a talk, to talk about a redevelopment proposal, but doesn't mean that I wouldn't invite them to come to speak. Well, that we could just engage a debate on the pros and cons. Well, for simply a neutral occasion, while there are journalists present, well, refuting them, I think is all childish and simply fail to offer any pathways that you chose not choose to overlook. If this logic applies to all the media reporting Hong Kong independence, may take the risk of being closed. Well, I found this logic incorrect. For this luncheon seminar, is FCC actually invite the pro-establishment camp of newsworthy figures and high officials, one of them which we see Wai Leong. So it was okay for him to attend, while you always been saying things to Hong Kong public do not appreciate. So does that mean that views opposing yours will not be allowed? So it's all right to let you speak while you would object to those views were different from you. So after hearing so many statements, that is the establishment camp logic. Sometimes they've been ridiculed as Hong Kong communists. That's the communism logic. So providing a venue that's equating to support, then they will crack down and suppress you. That's the CCP's logic. Well, from their mind, it was all correct. Well, I want to criticize them for the illogic when I found that it's actually perfectly reasonable in their mindset. From a lot of the foreign journalists I know that found this Hong Kong independence is far-fetched. Well, those independence advocates are offering a different proposal and so on. However, when being asked on the press on details, no answers were being given. Well, other than my own experience, on August 13 article on Time interview Mr. Annie Chan, which have been quoted. Let me quote that. It's actually a slight radical, even though it's more charitable. What it claims to an individual leading a political party, whereas the number party members is a mystery. So Mr. Annie Chan is simply forming a children's crusade. Well, how mean could this be? We could never get this harsh. To a certain extent, they're simply ridiculing him. So why are you labeling them as associating with external forces, thus supporting Hong Kong independence? So this kind of smearing is endless in this council. And Horace Chung retort the Democratic camp that you always claim that you were against Hong Kong independence. Well, I'm against Hong Kong independence from the first instance. Well, I don't agree with this. Doesn't mean I have to gag you. Then we don't just have a debate. Well, Hong Kong have a freedom of speech and the freedom of the press and the freedom of association. What Horace Chang, the deputy, seems to be indirectly encouraging Hong Kong independence. Well, does that mean we're not expressing our true political stance when we speak? And Horace Chang also mentioned the following. Well, a lot of things happening of suppression of press freedom elsewhere around the world. Why don't you speak up? He seems to be missing the point. Today we are dealing with Claudia's motion on the powers as conferred by the Articles 73, bracket 5 and 10. So since this is directly related to Hong Kong, that we're bringing to discussion, and Horace Chang is funny is that shall we discuss Donald Trump's misogynistic and racist statements in Lechico? You have to see to criticize him at all. However, he should not be discussed here. We're supporting Ms. Claudia MO as they have a direct relevance to Hong Kong. I know that Horace Chung is a huge Japan fan. Well, the Tokyo Fish Market relocation, should it be discussing at Lechico as well? I also wish to address a point. Well, Madame Deputy maybe appeared puzzled that the rationale provided for establishment camp against Claudia Mo was simply lacking. And Well, some colleagues claim that during her English in his chance English is too good, and maybe the speech is written by himself. I'm maybe probably not brought up in a household where English is the mother tongue. Well, the English as a second language, when I submit my assignment in the postgraduate level, I let the native speaker for editing. And it was claimed that the English being better, of a good standard, that means a rationale. There's something in English called beating around the bush. The Victor Mallet incident, in its aftermath, the Hong Kong government had embarrassed itself. Well, of the points raised by the pro-establishment camp, they were just equally embarrassing. Our views on Hong Kong independence has been clear. Regardless, the FCC had merely invited people of different views on his long-standing luncheon seminars, and it didn't appear to be supporting any Chen. So why do you consider a legitimate reason to crack down on Mallet and refusing him the work visa? So I found the government have done a terrible handling of the case. So the China's-U.S. trade dispute, while the presidency had enough on its plate, at this time the Carrie Lam is simply fanning the flames. Well, a lot of the members went to the UK and the US to conduct lobbying. Please just listen carefully. As an independent economy, and this Victor Mallet incident, and legally or otherwise, we owe him an explanation of the Foreign Chamber of Commerce. Terry Joseph, that American Chamber of Commerce, said that without freedom of the press, the capitalism cannot operate effectively. Trade and commerce cannot be conducted reliably. That is a very nice, a well-intended warning, which we need to take heed. I don't see why our colleagues would regard this whole case, would let this press freedom index to drop to this low. At the beginning, we had over when for this survey, the Hong Kong's once enjoyed the 18th ranking. Now we dropped to 70. It's all your fault. That Sony media been purchased by pro-China capital, and a lot of the senior management of the media have been getting very cozy with the government and being awarded honorary medals. And now the pro-establishment camp definitely have a place to play. I hope to support Claudia's motion.
Mr. Gary Chan. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I speak in opposition to Ms. Claudia MO's motion that pursuant to Article 73, 5 and 10 of the Basic Law to summon the Secretary for Security and the Director of Immigration to attend before the Council and to produce relevant papers to explain the case of Mr. Victor Mallet. Madam Deputy, I'm of the view that the motion has been used to escalate the incident to unrealistic levels. Some Democrats spoke yesterday that there was no need to debate this in the Legislative Council. I truly and definitely agree, because we have wasted a few hours on something quite meaningless. The motion itself and the wording of it is quite problematic. It says that the government refusal to renew for no reason the work visa of Mr. Victor Mallet. That is definitely problematic. The government gave no open explanation. It doesn't mean that there is no reason. The government refused the work visa of Mr. Mallet, and it didn't have to give an account on individual cases. That has been the usual practice and is also the international convention, but it doesn't mean that there is no reason. If we discuss this motion of Ms. Claudia MO, we are wasting time because, well, that is a non-issue. First, Hong Kong definitely welcomes foreign visitors to come here to have sightseeing and pleasure and work and live. And Hong Kong values press freedom. Mr. Andrew Wan said that in his speech and admitted it. Mr. Mallet's incident is just an isolated incident. Democrats always picture it as such an important event that it will impact on press freedom and freedom of speech. This brings me to Mr. Shou Ka-chun's story of 3 persons talking about a tiger. This is quite true. Many foreign media think that Hong Kong has no press freedom and no freedom of speech. It is because 3 persons say there is a tiger, and like the Democrats, they say to foreigners that there is no press freedom in Hong Kong. People who don't understand the situation may believe him. But is that the case, Madam Deputy? Go to newspaper vendors. There are so many newspapers, so many magazines in Hong Kong, and there are so many media organizations online. How many of them support the government here in Hong Kong? Just a minority. How many criticize the CE, S4S, and other principal officials, and also lash out at the government? Well, they are the majority. So do we have press freedom? Do we have freedom of speech? If there are so many media organizations which can cover a whole spectrum of political views, how can we say there is no press freedom and freedom of speech in Hong Kong? That is not true. Don't scaremonger Hong Kong people. Actually, before the handover, the Democrats has been saying that for over 20 years. You are still able to say it. You are still continuing to say it. So it's their freedom of speech in Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong residents are discerning. Many colleagues said that the press freedom index has sunk to 70. But I can cite you an example. Where is Japan in the ranking list? Japan has press freedom, and we know Japan very well. It ranks 67. And compared to Asian countries, we are not that far away. So don't belittle yourself. They also say that the Mallet incident has everything to do with press freedom and freedom of speech. But I must say that press freedom and freedom of the press must also be regulated by the Basic Law. The Basic Law safeguards press freedom and freedom of the press, but it doesn't mean that these two can venture beyond the Basic Law. If Democrats only quote from part of the Basic Law and not the entire Basic Law, they are not doing it right. They only choose the parts that are advantageous to their argument. But what about safeguarding the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country? They did not mention it. Or they would say that they would like to have an academic discussion on Hong Kong independence, so they were cherry-picking. They are a bad loser, and they seem to be saying everything. Well, actually, this Mallet incident is showing every person for who he is. I hope Democrats would respect one country, two systems, and explain to their foreign friends that the issue of work visa is something that is internal for Hong Kong, and it must not be interfered with by overseas governments. Some members of the public may not understand why there is denial of work visa for Mallet, and yet it doesn't have to explain. Actually, many members already said that This is within the realm of sovereignty of a country or a place. If the country or place has to explain about this, it would amount to undermining one's sovereignty. I can give you an example. Say I'd like to go to the home of Mr. Ray Chan and he doesn't allow me to. He doesn't have to explain to me why, right? Because it's his home, right? Therefore, if someone is not issued a work visa, then he should think about what behavior he presented so that he was denied the work visa. As you know, Mr. Mallet is a journalist. His work visa is for him to come to Hong Kong to gather news and to do news reporting and not other things. On TV, you could see this example. Mr. Mallet was not doing what a journalist should be doing. Rather, at FCC, he hosted a forum related to Hong Kong independence. He invited Andy Chan to speak. The central authorities and the Foreign Ministry office in Hong Kong already said that that would not be allowed, and that contravened the Basic Law and One Country, Two Systems. And that would touch the political red line. But yet, Mr. Mallet went ahead with it nevertheless. Therefore, he was involved in matters not related to a journalist's work. And that is why should he be given the work visa? Some Democrats would say, well, since Mr. Mallet is a journalist, and if you do this, it will not be proper. And then I would think, if a journalist should be allowed to do everything he wants without the regulation of the law, well, that wouldn't go, because even as legislators, you can't do anything you want. Even as a legislator, you cannot snatch other people's mobile phones. You cannot keep a cat or a dog here in the chamber, and you cannot go to a public place to recharge your mobile phone. Even if you have a public office, it doesn't mean you can do everything you want, and you have to act according to the law. And people tell you that you can't do anything, then you shouldn't do it. If you still carry on with it, you have to face the consequences. Mr. Andrew Wan said the FCC invited C.Y. Leung and the pro-establishment camp to speak. Well, it's not about who you invite, but what you allow that person to speak on. If US and European countries hold a lunch forum here, do you think they would invite an Al-Qaeda and even a sympathizer of that organization to speak? Of course not. That is quite clear. You shouldn't try to confuse the issue. I have spoken for long, Madam Deputy. I am of the view that there is just no need to debate this motion. On many different other occasions, we have already put forward the same viewpoints. Therefore, I like to say again and ask Democrats not to whitewash Hong Kong independence. And please don't escalate this incident of Mr. Mallet to unrealistic levels. Please object to the motion together with us.
Mr. Ray Chan, Madam Deputy, I speak in support